Hey guys, sorry I'm not here today, but fear not, you will still learn today and we'll still be on pace for this semester. So you should have finished the comparative advantage practice FRQ in your packets. You should have had about 10 minutes to work on that with the people around you. So we're going to go ahead and go through that. So this is an FRQ straight off a previously released exam. So this is what the FRQs look like. And I'm going to show you how to answer the FRQ, and even when it says explain, how you can explain without using sentences. Because remember, the FRQs in macroeconomics, you do not write sentences. Even if it says explain, justify, provide your reasoning, whatever it might be, you can still do that without sentences. So the first thing I want to point out is I went ahead and put my table together for comparative advantage, just like we saw last class. I think it's a little bit easier to look at comparative advantage questions when you have this table set up so you can do your math correctly and make sure you're going over or under. So that's the first thing that I did because I noticed it was a comparative advantage question. So I went ahead and set up my table. And then the next thing you want to do before you even start answering any FRQ questions in class is you want to go ahead and read through the whole thing and start underlining and identifying key things that we need to keep in mind here. So country X and country Y are trading partners and both produce furnaces and solar panels. The countries can produce the following amounts using equal amounts of resources. Country X can make 6 furnaces or 8 solar panels. Country Y can make 6 furnaces or 12 solar panels. A, which country has an absolute advantage in producing solar panels? B, calculate the opportunity cost of a furnace in country Y. Which country has the comparative advantage in producing furnaces? Explain. If the terms of trade were 2 furnaces for 1 solar panel, should country X produce domestically, import, or import from country Y? So before you even start answering it, you want to go ahead and read through the whole FRQ and identify key things. Make sure we know where we want to end at the end of the FRQ. So we'll start with A here. Which country has the absolute advantage in producing solar panels? Well, absolute advantage is who can make the most. And in terms of solar panels, that's going to be country Y. The end. We have answered A. We do not need to explain. It does not say explain. So because it does not say explain, you will not explain. Country Y, and then we're done with A. B, calculate the opportunity cost of a furnace in country Y. So this is where we need to go ahead and start doing our math. So this is an over problem. This is an output problem. And since this is an output problem, that means we're going to go over. So we're going to have 8 over 6 and 6 over 8, 6 over 12, and 12 over 6. And we're going to have 1 furnace and 1 solar panel. So 8 over 6 is going to give us 4 over 3, and this will give us 2, and this will give us 3 over 4 and 1/2. Double check that we did our math right. 4 over 3 is an inverse of 3 over 4. 2 is an inverse of 1 over 2. So we did our math correctly. So B, calculate the opportunity cost of a furnace in Y. So 1 furnace is equal to 2 solar panels. So B, the answer is 2 solar panels. The end of answer. It does not say explain, nothing like that. It just says calculate, which we did, and then identify what the opportunity cost is, which we did. C, which country has the comparative advantage in producing furnaces? Explain. So here is where you're going to see how to explain without writing a sentence. But first we need to figure out our comparative advantage. Remember, comparative advantage is the least opportunity cost. So we're looking for the smallest number here. And so for furnaces, is going to be country X, and then for solar panels will be country Y, but it's only asking about furnaces. So country X is going to have the comparative advantage because, and there's two ways that you can explain this. First way is saying they have the least opportunity cost. So that's the first way that you can explain why country X has the comparative advantage in furnaces, is because they have the least opportunity cost. Or your explanation could say that 4/3 is less than 2. And either one of those would be perfectly acceptable to explain why country X has the comparative advantage. This first option, country X, because they have the least opportunity costs, would be the more accepted way to explain. But if you wanted to just use the numbers, you could. Either one of those would work. And we have explained, and there's no sentences. We did not go into detail. We did not provide a story or anything like that. We answered it as simply as we possibly could, and then we stopped. D is a tricky part of this question. D involves the terms of trade. So the terms of trade where 2 furnaces are exchanged for 1 solar panel. Should country X produce solar panels domestically or import from Y? Well, we already know that country Y is going to be specializing in solar panels from our comparative advantage math here. And this question is asking, if the terms of trade are 2 furnaces for 1 solar panel, is country X going to be better off? And hopefully you notice that country X would not be better off. So country X needs to produce domestically. So you should have written down that country X should produce domestically. So they should be producing domestically. And it doesn't ask for explain. So D does not have explain at all. So you don't need an explanation. You just say country X should produce domestically, or if you want to be even shorter, you just have to put produce domestically because you answered the question, even if you just put produce domestically. And there's no explain for D, but I'm going to go ahead and explain why country X should produce domestically, just so you know. But you don't need to have this explanation on there at all. In fact, you shouldn't have it because D did not ask for an explanation. So why is country X going to be producing solar panels domestically? Well, they already give up 3/4 of a furnace to make 1 solar panel. So it doesn't make a lot of sense for country X to give up 2 furnaces for 1 solar panel, when if they can just give up 3/4 of a furnace for a solar panel, it makes much more sense for them to go ahead and just produce it domestically. So giving up 3/4 of a furnace for a solar panel is much better than giving up 2 furnaces for 1 solar panel. But again, you didn't have to have that. You should not have had that explanation because it did not say explain. All right, so go ahead and flip your packets over. So your homework last night was to read modules 5 and 6, which was over demand and supply. And we're going to go ahead and combine those two together on our market graph. So a market graph just shows the market for a single product. So this is where micro comes in, microeconomics comes in a little bit, is this market graph section. And so we're going to be graphing for apples today. And one thing that every single market graph for a single product or service must have is a title. If you do not have a title or a label on any of your graphs, I will not know what you're drawing and people will not know what you're drawing. And so I'm stressing that everything has to be labeled. and everything has to be titled so we know what you're talking about and what you're graphing for. And as we get into the multiple graphs, it will make more sense why the labeling is so important. So for now, just make sure you're really focusing on titling your graph and labeling everything. So our market graph is going to show demand and supply at equilibrium. We're going to have price on the vertical labeled as P, quantity on the horizontal labeled as Q. Our supply curve slopes upward, and we'll label that S1. Our demand curve slopes downward, label that D1, and then have some hash marks down to our horizontal, label that QE as quantity equilibrium, and then hash marks off to the vertical, and we'll label that PE as price equilibrium. So P is price, Q is quantity, S is supply, D is demand, PE is price equilibrium, and then QE is quantity equilibrium. So some of our labels and what they mean. When we are talking about our market graph and all of our future graphs that we'll have in class, the horizontal is going to be a number line. So this is 0 and this is some infinite number. So we are always going to be working off of the horizontal as a number line. Same thing with our vertical. Our vertical will also be a number line. It's going to be really important that we understand that this is a number line and this is stressing quantity. So we are at equilibrium, and at equilibrium, everybody wins. So everyone wins at equilibrium. Everyone wins at equilibrium. Equilibrium is the happy place in our market graph. That is the place where suppliers are making a profit and consumers have the cheapest possible product that they can purchase. So we're going to start with demand. So demand, the demand curve slopes downward. Okay, we have this downward slope on our demand curve because our law of demand is inverse, meaning they're opposite. So our law of demand, which hopefully you guys found in your notes, just states an increase in price equals a decrease in the quantity that we demand. And that's a true statement. Think of when you go and purchase something. The higher the price of the product, the less of the amount you're going to buy. If you go into Target and you see that t-shirts are $30 a piece, you're only going to buy one. But if you walk in and you see that t-shirts are $5 a piece, you might buy 5. So depending on the price of the product is going to determine the quantity that we want to purchase. And because of our law of demand, this creates an inverse slope. So it's a negative relationship, it's an opposite relationship. So if price is going up, quantity has to go down. If price is going down, quantity has to go up. And we can see that on our market graph. If we just start at equilibrium here and price goes up, well, our quantity went down. And if we come back to equilibrium, our price goes down, well, our quantity increased. So we can see that that is a true statement there. So let's go ahead and draw market graphs here and increase and decrease boxes. And again, we're going to be graphing for apples today. So we draw our graph here. We have price on the vertical, quantity on the horizontal. Our supply curve is going to slope upward and our demand curve is going to slope downward. And go ahead and label your quantity equilibrium and your price equilibrium points. And do the same thing in decrease. Prices on the vertical, quantities on the horizontal, supply slopes upward, demand slopes downward in our equilibrium points. Some of you may be asking, why are you going to make us sketch out all these graphs for the semester? Well, you need to, one, and this is great practice for the exam, so you don't even have to think about drawing these graphs. And I almost forgot my title over there. So demand slopes downward, a great way to remember that demand slopes downward if the law of demand is not sticking with you is the D, and demand and the D and downward match up. So D in demand and D in downward. So demand slopes downward. So we have some shifters of our demand curve. So our shifters for our demand and supply curve, these are the things that are happening in the background. So these are things that are impacting the entire market for apples or whatever it is that we are graphing for. So these are things that are going to impact everything. So we're not looking at the price of what we're graphing for when we're talking about these shifters. So one of our shifters is tastes and preferences. Tastes and preferences are what's in right now. Everyone wants avocados now, avocado toast, avocado this, avocado that. So that's a taste. Everyone wants avocados. Preferences would also fall into that fad kind of category. So maybe the new thing, from avocados is going to be, I don't know, like kale, or kale can make a comeback or something like that. Another shifter is going to be number. So the number of consumers, the number of demanders in the market can shift our entire market for apples. So a great example of that is Frisco. Frisco is constantly growing. Every day you get onto the road, there's more cars and more people. And that's just number of people are increasing. So the demand for apples in Frisco is increasing just because there's more people here. Our third shifter is the price of substitutes and complements. A substitute is something that we can sub out for a product, and a complement is something that goes along with it. So for apples, we could become really specific with our type of apples. Maybe we're talking about Honeycrisp apples, and we're talking about the market for Honeycrisp apples. And all of a sudden, we don't want the Honeycrisp apples anymore. We want the red Gala apples. So the Gala apples are a substitute for the Honeycrisp apples. Complements are things that go with that product or service that we're graphing for. So peanut butter and apples go together. So if apples are in high demand, then peanut butter would also be in high demand. Another example of a substitute good, goods would be butter and margarine. Margarine is a substitute for butter. Another example for complementary goods would be peanut butter and jelly. They work together. Our next shifter is income. So just a change in our consumers' income can impact the market for individual products and services. So the more income people have in that area, the more demand that they're going to have for products, and the less income people have, the less demand they're going to have for products. And then expectations is our final shifter. Expectations is when we are expecting a change in the market for that product for some reason. So maybe you're a really big fan of Honeycrisp apples, and you know that the Honeycrisp apple season is almost over. So you are going to demand more of those Honeycrisp apples so you can save them for later, because you know they won't be there anymore. They're going to go out of season. So those are shifters of demand. And we're going to go ahead and show the shifts on our graphs here. So an increase in demand means we move to the right. So anytime we increase, we always go to the right. And we are moving rightward on our horizontal line here. So an increase in demand means we're moving to the right, which means we're going to move over here. I'm going to label that demand 2, Q2, and P2. So did we actually increase in demand? Yes, we did. Here's our starting point right here at QE, and here's our ending point at Q2, and this is a number line, 0, an infinite number, and we went from E to 2. So we showed an increase in demand. So this increase in demand, we increase demand, that will lead us to an increase in price and an increase in quantity. A decrease is going to go to the left. So whenever we decrease, we always go to the left on our horizontal. And so for demand, it looks like this, D1 to D2. We have Q2 and P2, and we want to show our arrow shift. So did we actually decrease in demand by shifting to the left? Yes, we did. We started at QE and we ended at Q2, and that's our number line with this being 0, and this is an infinite number, and we did decrease in demand. So a decrease in demand leads to a decrease in price and a decrease in quantity. So let's jump on to supply. And if you didn't get all of this, the key is in Google Classroom, so feel free to look at that after we're done to make sure you have everything. So let's go ahead and draw markets for apples again in our increase and decrease boxes here. We have price on the vertical, quantity on the horizontal, supply slopes upward, demand slopes downward, and label our equilibrium points. And make sure we have labels so we know what we're graphing for. We have price on the vertical, quantity on the horizontal, supply goes up, demand goes down, and here's our equilibrium points. So supply is from the perspective of a producer, so you need to put on your producer hat. You need to look at supply through a producer lens and keep that in mind as we're talking about it, because that's the only way to make sure we don't get confused, especially when we talk about our law of supply here. So supply slopes upward, as we can see on our graph. And a great way to remember that supply slopes upward, just like up here, demand slopes downward, the D and the D. Supply has the word up in it. So up and up, up and up. So we know supply slopes up because it's upward. It has the word up right in supply. So our law of supply states that as price goes up, we have an increase in the quantity supplied. And that makes sense if you're looking at this from a producer standpoint. If the price of the product that we are making is increasing, not the resources involved in it, our cost of production is the same, but the price, the sticker price at the store is going up, then we're going to make more at that price point because we want to make a profit. So it makes sense that as price is going up, the quantity supplied is also going up. So our law of supply is a positive relationship. It's a direct relationship. That's why we have that upward slope, because it is a positive relationship. It is a direct relationship. So if price goes up, quantity supplied has to go up. If price goes down, quantity supplied has to go down. So let's identify our shifters for supply here. Again, think of this on the production end. Our first shifter is going to be the costs of inputs. So these are going to be the costs of our limited resources going into our product. So this is the cost of production. So if the cost of our production is increasing, then we are going to have to decrease the supply. If the cost of production is decreasing, then we can increase the supply. Our next shifter is going to be number. So that's just the number of producers in the market. So let's just say our class made tennis shoes, and we asked Ms. Thomas and Mr. Huggins' class to go ahead and join in and make tennis shoes, and we have increased the supply of tennis shoes in the market. Technology is another shifter of supply. So technology is part of those resources. So if we have better technology, faster technology, then we're going to be able to make more of our product. The government steps in here. So government actions can influence the supply, and they influence supply by taxes and subsidies. So a tax, we all know what taxes are. That's an additional fee on our production, and a subsidy is actually government handout. So subsidy is when the government steps in and provides assistance to struggling industries. So a great example of industries that receive subsidies is agriculture. A lot of our agriculture production receives subsidies to help them. So taxes decrease the supply, and subsidies increases the supply. Expectations is another shifter of supply. So if we are expecting an increase in the purchase of our product, we're going to increase the supply. If we are expecting something to happen to where we're no longer going to need our product out on the market, we're going to decrease supply. So let's say we make flip-flops, and in the winter, well, most places that actually experience a winter, they don't wear flip-flops. So you're not going to see a supply of flip-flops in the winter in those areas. So they're going to decrease their supply. And then our final shifter is productivity. And that is just how productive or unproductive you are. So if your factory is extremely productive, then you're going to be able to increase your supply. And if your factory is unproductive, then you're going to decrease your supply. So let's go ahead and show the shifts here. So an increase in supply is going to go to the right. Okay, so just like demand, increase always goes to the right. We always go to the right when we are increasing, because we are working off this horizontal number line where this is 0 and this is some infinite number, and we are increasing. So we want to go this way. So an increase in supply looks like this. We have S2, and here's Q2 and an arrow shift, and here's P2 in our arrow shift. So it looks funny. It looks like we did it backwards, but we didn't. We increased the supply because our horizontal is our number line with this 0, and this is some infinite number, and we started at QE and we ended at Q2, and we increased the supply. So an increase in supply will lead to a decrease in price and an increase in quantity. And we pull that information straight off our graph here. Now, this is where people start to flip out, but it's correct. And if it takes us a second, that's fine. So decrease will always go to the left. Whenever we're talking about decreasing, we always go to the left because we are working off our number line. Our horizontal is our number line, where this is 0 and this is an infinite number. So if we are decreasing in supply and we are going to the left, it looks like this. And there's S2. Here's Q2 and P2. It looks like I did it wrong, but I swear I did not, because we are working off our horizontal number line, where this is 0 and this is an infinite number, and we started at QE and we ended at Q2, and therefore we did decrease our supply. So a decrease in supply will lead to an increase in price and a decrease in quantity. Okay. So some key things to remember here. We have to be careful of what a scenario is asking us about and asking us for. So we can either have an entire shift of the curve like we did up above, or we can have a movement along the curve. So if we have a price change, meaning the price of the product, the sticker price of the product has changed, we are going to move along the curve. So we're going to have movement along the curve if we have a price change. So that means we have walked into Target and we have now seen that that product was $5, but now it's $7, which is going to decrease the amount that we demand. Or if we're looking at this from the supply end, we walk in and we hear that Target has increased the price of our product by $2. We're going to increase the quantity supplied at that higher price point. So if we have a price change, we're moving along the curve. And that means we have a change in quantity. So if we are talking about a change in quantity, we're talking about a price change, we're talking about movement along the curve. And here's our delta change symbol. So if we are talking about a price change, that means we are talking about a change in quantity supplied. So QS is quantity supplied. Or we're talking about a change in QD, which is quantity demanded. So if we are talking about a change in quantity supplied and change in quantity demanded, we are talking about a change in price. So if we have change in quantity, we are talking about a price change, meaning we're going to move along the curve. If there's no price change, and we're not talking about a change in quantity, we're just talking about a change in the market as a whole because of one of these shifters from either demand or supply causing an entire change to our market, then they're just referring to the curve. So they're just referring to S, our supply curve, or they're referring to D, our demand curve. So if they're not talking about price, they're talking about an increase in the cost of our inputs. They're talking about a total change of supply. So an entire shift to our market has happened. If we're talking about a substitute product coming in and changing the demand for another product, we're talking about the demand curve. So you have to be very, very careful that you are reading these questions and these scenarios all the way through and taking the time to underline or identify those key phrases in those questions. So I'm going to work through 2 problems with you on the practice pages here. So go ahead and flip over your page. And we're going to do 2 demand practice problems first. And then we'll do 2 supply problems. So first, let's read the directions here. We are going to complete this chart based on the scenarios listed on the left. In the last column on the right, over here, you're drawing a completely labeled market for autos that reflects the scenario. So each one of these graphs over here in this column, they're going to be titled auto. Okay, that's what we're graphing for. So we'll go ahead and do this first one here. And I would go ahead and just draw your market graph for autos, since we know we're going to be graphing for autos for this whole page. And we have price on the vertical, quantity on the horizontal. Our supply curve slopes upward. Our demand curve slopes downward. QE and PE. Remember to label everything. Everything needs a label. Every line needs a label. Every graph needs a title. And you need to be very aware of the ones and twos. 1 means you start there, 2 means you ended there. If you just start drawing random lines with S's and you don't tell me which one you start with and which one you end with, then I have no idea what's going on. And the readers have no idea what's going on. So just be very, very aware of your labeling. All right, so this first question here says consumers' income drops. So if consumer income is dropping, is that going to be a change in the quantity demanded, or is that just a change in demand? That's going to be just a change in demand. Why is it just a change in demand? Well, because income is a shifter of demand. So if change in demand, what is the non-price determinant? So what is that shifter causing the change in income? There's a direct shifter. And if income is going down, that means we as consumers have less money to spend on autos. So our demand curve is going to shift to the left. Then we want to go ahead and show our demand curve shifting to the left and the changes that we'll have on our auto market. So we'll label that D2. Here's Q2 and P2. So we had a decrease in price and a decrease in quantity. So let's look at another one here. I'm actually going to go to the very last one. So go ahead and draw my market for autos. Prices on the vertical, quantities on the horizontal. Supply curve slopes upward, demand curve slopes downward. And then our equilibrium points need to be labeled. So our scenario here is price of US auto rises. So key word is price. We have a price change. So because we have a price change, that means we have a change in quantity demanded because we have a price change. This column is going to be NA because we did not shift the demand curve. And this one will also be NA or not shift because we're not shifting the demand curve. We're moving along the demand curve here. And how do I know we're moving along the demand curve? Because this is titled demand practice. That's how I know we're going to move along the demand curve. So we're going to assume that our starting point is at equilibrium. So we'll go ahead and label that price point 1. And then the price of US autos is rising. So that means we need to move upward on our demand curve and go ahead and label that price point 2 and show a P2 and then go ahead and show a Q2. And we follow the law of demand. As price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. And that's how you show a movement along the demand curve. Go ahead and flip over to supply practice. I'll do 2 with you. So So we'll go ahead and start with the first one. It's the same directions, only now we're focusing on supply, and we're still graphing for autos. So go ahead and draw your market for autos. We have price on the vertical, quantity on the horizontal. Our supply curve slopes upward, our demand curve slopes downward, and we have our equilibrium points, QE and PE. So our scenario, auto workers union agrees to a wage cut. So we have a wage cut, meaning it is not as expensive to pay our workers. And wages is a cost of input. So if our wages have gone down, and again, we're talking about supply, that means we as a producer can hire more people to make more autos. So this is a change in supply question because it is a cost of input. Wages is a cost of input. Ooh. Spelling. So wages is a cost of input. So because our wages are going down, that means our cost of inputs is going down, which means we're going to go to the right. So we're going to have an increase in supply here. And again, increase always goes to the right. So we're going to move our supply curve to the right, label that S2. And here we have Q2 and P2. And we want to show our arrow change. And because of that increase in supply, we have decreased the price and increased the quantity. So it sounds like number one should actually be a decrease in supply because you're thinking, but wait, wages have gone down, so people will leave. Not immediately. And that's not what the scenario says. So if the scenario does not talk about a background situation, do not assume anything is happening other than what is right there in front of your face. So let's do another one. Let's do number 3. Number 3, let's go ahead and draw our market for autos. We have price on the vertical, quantities on the horizontal, supply slopes upward, demand slopes downward. We have QE and we have PE. Remember, everything is labeled. We have our 1s and 2s, so we know where we start and where we finish. Number 3 says price of U.S. cars increases. And our key word here is price. So if we have a price change, are we going to have a change in supply or change in quantity supplied? It will be a change in quantity supplied because it is a price change. Therefore, we're going to move along the curve. So this is NA, and this is going to be no shift because we're not shifting the supply curve. We're just going to move on it. And how do I know this is a supply curve movement? Because we're on the supply practice page. So we're going to start with price point 1 at equilibrium. The price of cars has increased, so we're going to go ahead and move up our supply here, and we'll show price 2, and we'll show quantity 2. So that increase in price does give us an increase in the quantity supplied. Now I know that many of you are sitting there thinking, but wait, what about demand? Demand says if price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. But we're not talking about demand. We're just talking about supply. So we're not going to do a double shift. We're just going to stop right there and not do anything else because the question does not tell us to. Next class, we will do double shifts and we will do all of that fun stuff that I know many of you are so desperately wanting to do to fix problems that we have created. But we will do that next class. For now, just focus on doing what the scenario says. So for the remainder of class, which you should have about half or a little less than half, is you're going to finish up the demand practice that we did not do, so those 3 in the middle. And then you're also going to finish up the 3 on the supply practice page that we did not do. You're going to go ahead and finish those up with the people around you or by yourself if you want to be lonely. Your homework tonight is to study for your quiz next class. The quiz is over modules 1 through 4. So this material that we just went over will not be on the quiz next class, so do not have a panic attack about it. And then you also have modules 7 and 8 for homework as well. So make sure you have all of that ready to go. And that will be on Tuesday. Monday is a holiday, so you're not here on Monday. We come back on Tuesday, which is when you'll have your quiz. And I will check modules 5 and 6 and modules 7 and 8. In Google Classroom is the key to the notes page that we did, and also the key to the practice problems. So do not just copy that down. It's in Google Classroom right now. Do not just copy that down onto your paper. Actually do the problems on your own first and then check with the key. So next class when I'm here, we can go over any of those things and questions and problems. So I know what we need to cover and what you need to ask questions on. Otherwise, if you're just copying it down, then you really have no clue what's going on. There's also demand and supply review videos in there as well if you want to watch those. They will review demand and supply, and they're pretty good videos in addition to the ones that you should have watched for your notes. So it's a hint, and wink wink, if you did not watch the videos in your notes, I will know. So you have some extra time to get that done. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to stop by tomorrow. I should be here tomorrow. You can stop by in the morning and ask some questions. And then, of course, Tuesday morning, I have tutorials, scheduled tutorial times Tuesday morning. So you're more than welcome to come in on Tuesday morning if you have questions that you desperately need answered before class on Tuesday. All right, you guys have a great weekend, and I will see you on Tuesday.